Since 1950, the Big Pie Award has been presented to alumni brothers who are held in high esteem by virtue of outstanding accomplishment, which brings honor to the brother and to Pi Lambda Phi. It is the Lifetime Achievement Award for Pi Lam, and the Big Pi chapter has become a who's who of well-regarded and famous Pi Lam alumni. Previous honorees include Sandy Koufax, Rafer Johnson, Bud Selig, Oscar Hammerstein, Richard Rogers, Leon Falk, Howard Cosell, Bennett Cerf, Lee Steinberg, David Temple, Jack Marsh. Tonight, we honor the newest member of the Big Pi chapter, Dr. Brent Glass from Lafayette College. I now call on Brother Riley Temple to introduce Brother Glass.
Good evening. It's an honor to speak in tribute to Brent Glass, who I've known for 51 years. Neither of us shows it. We met as fraternity brothers in the Sigma chapter of Pi Lam at Lafayette. Brent, of course, has had a distinguished career, a fact that is not at all surprising to those of us who've known him for a long time and met him a long time ago. I am proud tonight of my fraternity that it acknowledges the significance of his achievements and thus confers upon him this evening the coveted Big Pi Award. Brent casts a glow upon those of us who have been a part of his life. The great American playwright August Wilson often said, "We are all beholden to the kiln in which we were fired." We're here this evening because Brent Glass was fired in a kiln of achievement, discipline, intellectual inquiry, and a dedication to social justice. And that was some kiln. His earliest years were spent in classrooms in Hewlett, New York, along with others who later, like him, would contribute enormously to the greater good and to our collective understanding of the complexities of the human condition. Those same forces shaped that group of children. Listen to this. His classmates included the award-winning documentary filmmaker Errol Morris, the producer, director, and writer who won an Oscar for The Fog of War, a film I watched again just this past week. Sitting in the classroom with Brent was the kid who would become a famous popular song composer, Jim Steinman, who wrote such classics as Total Eclipse of the Heart, they'll only know this up here, and 2 of 3 Ain't Bad. There was the funny kid who became the award-winning journalist and sports writer, Tony Kornheiser. There was James Romano, who would go on to become the curator of Egyptian collections at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. And there was little Dave Schneiderman, who became the publisher of the Village Voice. A year behind Brent in that same school was the fashion designer Donna Karan. And a few years ahead of him was the poet Louise Gluck. I mean, really, was there something in the water? And as you know, after Lafayette, Brent went on to earn his master's degree in American Studies from NYU and his PhD in history from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He stayed in North Carolina through the 1980s, where he became a father to his son, Lauren, and served as the executive director of the North Carolina Humanities Council. Later, he settled in Pennsylvania, where he was the director of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. And like his other grammar school classmates, he too rose to national prominence, and in his case, to become the Elizabeth Macmillan Director of the Smithsonian's American History Museum. Today, he nourishes his passion for public history and the process by which it is remembered by serving as a consultant on fascinating projects such as the future of Sing Sing, Hallowed Ground, and as a member of the U.S. Flight 93 Memorial Commission. His most recent publication is a fun book called 50 Great American Places. When I stepped into Lafayette's Pylam House on a Sunday afternoon rush visit in the fall of 1967, actually I think I recall that Andy Galbert might have been there that day, there were quite a number of brothers milling about who were campus pillars. And among them was Brent Glass. Then at the beginning of his junior year, he had served as scribe, archon, and he was Rex at this time. He was a history major, of course, a member of honoraria such as the Distinguished History Honor Society Phi Alpha Theta. He would graduate from Lafayette in 1969 with distinction in research. His return to Lafayette in 2003 would be to receive an honorary degree for public service. Not long after that, he was appointed as a Lafayette College trustee, where there too, he served with distinction. From the beginning of that fall rush, I began to understand just how he stood out among his fraternity brothers. We spoke about him with more than a hint of reverence. In fact, we coveted his respect. Brent was smart, decent, honorable, level-headed, and not at all given to the usual frat boy hijinks. Although, he was no stick in the mud, and he laughed and laughs easily, and in those wild days, he laughed at the absurdity of much of it. It was also a treasure trove of information, stories, juicy stories, that only students would like. You see, he was a waiter during lunch in the faculty dining room, and he had a sharp eye and ear for detail and nuance. The brothers of Pylam at Lafayette were predominantly Jewish. There weren't that many fraternities that welcomed Jewish men despite the legalities. And because the Sigma chapter had been America's first white chapter to elect a black president in 1958, it also had a reputation as a comfortable place for black men to land. The chapter in those days was remarkable. Dean's List letters could go unnoticed because they were so plentiful as to be mistaken for mass campus mailing. For 2 consecutive semesters, the average GPA was 3.8. Average. Eat your heart out, MIT. It also had a wicked intramural basketball team. Brent, I think you were forward, weren't you? Yeah. Brent's life was beginning to form a pattern. Like his earliest years, here too, he was a star among stars. Our chapter produced the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, the CEO of Pepsi, one of the world's great retina detachment surgeons, a famous national TV California plastic surgeon, right? A child psychiatrist who was not long ago heralded in the New York Times for his groundbreaking treatment of pediatric emotional disorders. Just this morning, I picked up a favorite poem written by the oft-published Mitchell Ditkoff. The scholars, doctors, and lawyers are way too numerous to count. And we would also produce the man who would serve as the college president, Arthur Rothkopf, also a Big Pie winner. And if serving on the Lafayette College Board of Trustees is any measure of lifetime achievement, when Brent was elected as trustee, he joined the board's lion's share of Pi Lambs. When we were students, Brent helped to craft a speakers program. He has great stories of driving to pick up really famous people, including one Ralph Nader, who rode in Brent's car that had no seatbelts. The speakers came to our house for dinner before going off to speak to the larger college community. It was a magical time, although we didn't know it then. In preparation for tonight, I watched a YouTube video of C-SPAN's Brian Lamb interviewing Brent at the reopening of the museum after a big renovation. And in it, Brent, standing before an exhibit of America at War, he spoke of entering college in 1965, a year of increasing escalation of the Vietnam War. I suppose his commitment to social justice had been formed much earlier in his life by home, family, school, and faith. And Brent spoke movingly in this interview about how the 60s had shaped him. The years of the Civil Rights Revolution, then in its denouement, and the tortured college years, tense because of war, 1965 to 1969. The interview was moving and resonant of young adult fears, the fears that rumbled the ground beneath us at the time. I surmise that Brent sees his major achievement as Smithsonian American History Director as the redesign of the core of the museum and the preservation of the Star-Spangled Banner. But there are others. The acquisition and display of the Greensboro lunch counter that in 1960 was one of the earliest sites of the Civil Rights Revolution. The exhibit commemorating the 50th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education. The America at War exhibit. And then there was the time that he escorted, with their own seat next to him in first class, Dorothy's ruby slippers, to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show. She was so excited that she asked him if she could pick them up, to touch them, those red sequin pumps. He told her no. And damned if she didn't pick them up anyway. Under his watch, the first LGBT exhibit focused on the nation's response to AIDS and the earliest gay rights protests in Washington and at Stonewall. I think, Brent, I admire most your flawless management of the transition to the opening of American history's stunning new neighbor, the African American Museum of History and Culture. That whole process was fraught with landmines, but it worked because of you and your carefully managed relationship with its director, Lonnie Bunch. You are always and ever level-headed, calm, unflappable. It was wonderful to be among your wedding guests as you married the writer Catherine Keller. You and Catherine have become members of my family, present always for the occasions for which families get together. We've even been known to snap at one another across the holiday table when some insisted that the Democratic presidential nominee would be John Edwards or Mark Warner, David. And we magically end the evenings without wearing the food. Brent, I've always and ever held you in highest esteem, and I mean it. And I am humbled and honored that you have asked me to be here tonight to honor you. Congratulations. Come on.
Raleigh, stay here for the photo.
Stay here.
Thank you, Brother Temple. It is my honor to present to Brother Brent Glass his Big Pie Award. Brent? Yes. Wow. There's more? Okay. I'm going to hold this? Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Riley, and thank you, everyone, for this wonderful, wonderful occasion. I'm the only thing standing between you and the songs, so I'm not going to speak for a long time. I'm very honored to be here, and I don't take honors for granted. I recall early in my career, I was invited to speak at the annual meeting of a county historical society in North Carolina. And they, after speaking at the society's annual meeting, they gave me a lifetime membership in the society, a lifetime membership in the society. And it was a great honor. And at my age at that time, it was a great value to be a lifetime member. About a year later, I received a letter saying your lifetime membership has expired. So I have always valued these honors because you never know what's going to happen at the next convention. I do want to thank my wife, Catherine, for being here tonight. I want to thank a couple of very close friends, Charlie and Cammie Bryan, who are here. Charlie is a national leader in the public history field. He's president and CEO emeritus of the Virginia Historical Society. And fortunately, we've been friends for 30 years or more and continue to work together on behalf of history education and historic preservation in this country. So Charlie and Cammie have been great friends. And Charlie was also a member of the board at the American History Museum and continues to be. So please, a few snaps for Charlie. I want to thank Bill Sellers for being here. Bill is the president of the Journey Through Hallowed Ground National Heritage Area, but more recently, the founder of the National History Academy. And you're going to hear more about the National History Academy as years go on. The first summer of the Academy, first summer season just finished last week, and we had 90 students from around the country of all races, from 29 states, and they were studying history for 5 weeks, visiting historic sites from Monticello up to Gettysburg to Baltimore and Washington. And Bill was the inspiration for that program, and really very proud to be a part of it. So Bill, thank you very much for being here this evening. I want to thank David Temple and Riley Temple, both for being here, good friends. And Riley was mentioning about our annual dinners at his house at Christmas, which are, the word lively doesn't begin to describe. The debates, the discussions, sometimes the disagreements that occur, and the food. And the food is always great. So thank you both for being here. And I want to also recognize David Temple's pioneering effort to fulfill the Pi Lam Creed with his own personal experience. So David, we admire you, we're proud of you, and it was great that you were able to share that story today here in Richmond, in your hometown. I want to thank Ian Lowe and the staff of Pi Lam and congratulate you on a wonderful conference, the 123rd year, and it's been great to meet some of the people on the staff here, and you've been so attentive and so responsive, so thank you very much for what you have done. I want to reference a connection that Riley and I have that he didn't mention, but has been very meaningful and formative to me, and I think it's relevant to this evening's event. When Riley was a freshman, I was a junior, we would study in the library, and then we would take study breaks. And you know what study breaks sometimes can be longer than the time you're actually spending in the library. But on one particular study break on a spring evening at Lafayette, we were sitting in the snack bar, April 4th, 1968, and word came that Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. And we were sitting there together. We really didn't know each other that well at that moment. But that moment, we had totally different experiences, totally different backgrounds, but that was a moment that brought us together as friends, as human beings, and it was a moment that I think 50 years later still resonates with both of us. the enormity of that event. When we talk about a motto that you have adopted of leading courageously, I think you have to start with Dr. King if you're going to try to understand what it means to lead courageously. In my estimation, he was the greatest unelected leader possibly in American history, probably the most impactful, most influential leader who led courageously throughout his unfortunately very short life. I'll tell you one little story, one little anecdote about Dr. King that isn't very well known, even though I think it's very instructive. When he was born, his name was Michael King. How many of you know that? His father was Michael King, and he was Michael King Jr. When his father was a minister, and his father and a group of ministers went to Germany in the early 1930s, and they learned about the story of the Protestant Reformation and of Martin Luther. And his father was so impressed with that story that when he came home to Atlanta, he changed his name to Martin Luther King and changed his son's name to Martin Luther King Jr. And some of Dr. King's very close friends continued to call him Mike throughout his life. Why I think the story is important is because that family's culture and the culture of protest and civil disobedience and challenging the system was embedded in that name change. And so I think that that story has always resonated with me as something that helps me understand who he was as an individual and possibly influenced his leadership throughout his life. I have to confess that when I first joined Pi Lam, I was a little ambivalent about joining a fraternity. It was a time, as many of you may read about, and some of you may even remember, of ambivalence about conventions, about institutions, that we were challenging a lot of the basic assumptions of society at that time, political assumptions, social assumptions, social conventions, and fraternities were being questioned as whether they were relevant or not. And I did join a fraternity, fortunately met Andy Goldberg, who took me aside and said, you have to make Pi Lam a relevant organization on the campus. You have to take the lead of intellectual leadership. And that's how we started the speaker series, which Riley referred to. And I have to thank Andy for making that suggestion, and I'm happy that I was able to influence it. And yes, I did chauffeur Ralph Nader without seatbelts in my mother's 1963 Bonneville convertible, which and he complained the entire way. What's that? I could have been a Corvette. And he complained the entire time. I also have to mention one other person who at Pi Lam who was not a member of, was not officially a brother, but we called him brother, and that was Brother Tom Bright. He was the chef at Lafayette, at Pi Lam. Not a celebrity chef, I can assure you. But Brother Bright was also the president of the local NAACP. And in that capacity, he introduced us to the community at a time when there was great social change in our country. And Brother Bright was as influential as any professor I had at Lafayette, and I'd like to remember him at this time. So to the undergraduates who are here, I have a couple of messages. One, you've heard all about the importance of the Pi Lam Creed, and I just want to reemphasize that. I think I'm very inspired and proud that I belong to a fraternity that has this creed. But I want to say a few words about history. History is not inevitable. History happens because you as individuals make history. You make decisions, you take actions. History is a resource for understanding our own times. But in terms of history today, it is not inevitable. You are making history. And so I ask you to study history, especially the importance of leadership in history. I've mentioned Dr. King as one example. Last year I had the good fortune, Catherine and I were on the beaches of Normandy in France, and I began to realize the amazing leadership of Dwight Eisenhower at that critical moment in world history. We can visit Gettysburg and understand the importance of Abraham Lincoln's leadership in a critical moment. But you cannot be a leader in a democracy without understanding history. And we cannot have a democracy without leaders who understand history. I'll say that again. You cannot be a leader in a democracy without knowing our history, and we cannot have a democracy without leaders who understand our history. I will close by saying, don't wait to lead. We have examples right now of young people who are taking leadership around the country. The Parkland students in Florida, for example. Last week, Bill Sellers and I welcomed Ernest Green to the National History Academy. I don't know if any of you know who Ernest Green is, but he's 86 now, but when he was 16 years old, he was one of the Little Rock Nine. At the age of 16, he led courageously by being the first African-American student to graduate from Central High School in Little Rock. Attending his graduation was Martin Luther King. So we met Ernie Green. Right now, I'm involved in a couple of projects I just want to mention before I close. One, as Riley mentioned, is a new museum at Sing Sing Prison in New York, where we're trying to tell the story of criminal justice in this country over the past 200 years. It's an ambitious project, but I'm feeling like this is the right time to tell that story. Another project that I'm working on is a documentary called One Vote. And this is a documentary that traces the story of 5 individuals on Election Day in 2016 who were motivated to promote voting in their community. They include Warren Buffett in Omaha, Nebraska, an African-American woman doctor in South Carolina, an ex-convict in Kentucky who was petitioned to vote for the first time, a bar and grill owner in Chicago who still maintains a voting precinct at his bar and grill, and a couple in Alaska who rent a bobsled to get to their nearest polling place. This documentary we're going to be screening on college campuses around the country. And if you're interested, you can contact me, and I would love to have this documentary at one of your schools. You can lead in this fall by encouraging people to participate in our democracy by voting, peacefully representing your point of view, and that's something that I think you can all do as leaders right now. So I want to close by thanking all of you for being here. It really is a treat, an honor, an inspiration to be part of your family. Thank you.